When my son Ethan knocked on my door that night, breathing like he'd run a marathon, I thought he'd lost his keys. I wasn't prepared for the words that tumbled out. "Mom, I think Claire cheated on me," or for the way the room changed after he said them. That's the hook I used in every late-night retelling, but the truth is messier, and somehow more human. I'm Sarah, and this is what happened when my son came for advice. And I discovered a truth I never imagined. Ethan was 26, all earnest eyes and uncertain jokes, the kind of son who still ate cereal at our kitchen table and asked my opinion on everything from job offers to whether neon signs were retro or tragic. When he sat opposite me, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, his voice was low. He hadn't gone into graphic detail. He didn't need to. He described the texts, the late silence on the phone, the accidental glimpse of someone's name on Claire's messages. He was hurt, embarrassed, furious in the way heartbreak can make you small and huge at once. I listened the way mothers do, with 1,000 small, instinctive defenses at the ready to soothe, to sort, to love. We talked about boundaries, about dignity, about the difference between suspicion and proof. I told him to slow down, to avoid scenes, to decide what he could forgive and what he couldn't. I told him to talk to Claire directly. He nodded, clutched his mug, and left with a plan to confront her the next day. I hugged him longer than usual and mouthed a promise to be there. That night, the house felt different. I noticed the little things. Mark's cologne lingering in the hallway though he'd been traveling that week, a single wine glass left in the sink, the faint echo of a laugh in the living room. Mark and I had been married for nearly 20 years. There had been seasons of easy romance and others of exhaustion. Work, travel, toddler years, a mortgage, but always a quiet current of partnership. We were practical people who loved practical things. A good lawn, a reliable SUV, a playlist for rainy days. Infidelity, in my mind, belonged to movies and other people. The next afternoon, Ethan came back more shaken. His voice had that raw, brittle edge of someone who had seen more than he wanted to. Claire's apartment smelled like perfume and orange peel. He'd found a receipt, dated the week he'd been at work late, for 2 coffees and a movie ticket under a name he didn't recognize. She'd admitted to kissing someone at a party. He wanted to know whether to try to repair what they had, whether a relationship broken once could be made whole again. I offered the same calm counsel, but the more he spoke, the more I noticed details that didn't fit in my neat map of our lives. Ethan mentioned seeing a car idling near Claire's office late at night. He mentioned the man's age, the tilt of his hat, the way someone had opened the passenger door for Claire like he always did for me. For a moment the mention felt like a trick of the ear, coincidence, projection. But then a cold, stubborn thought took root, and I couldn't chase it away. Later that evening, Mark called to say he'd be back early. He sounded cheerful, the kind of voice that eases you into a favorite melody. He walked in humming, arms full of a grocery bag and a takeout container. We talked about the kids, about the yard, about trivial happy things. It was ordinary, until it wasn't. I found, folded in his jacket pocket, a napkin with a name and a number. A scribble so small I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for the proof my brain was suddenly hungry for. I didn't confront Mark right away. I watched him instead. There was a softness in the way he smiled at certain texts, a detail in his mannerisms that reminded me of Ethan describing the man at Claire's party. My chest tightened with each small alignment. The tilt of a head, the cadence of a laugh, a nickname whispered into his phone. I felt ridiculous and clinical and betrayed all at once. The worst part wasn't the possibility that Mark had crossed a line. It was the idea that our family might fracture where I'd always thought it strongest. I started looking for facts, because facts feel like anchors when everything else is stormy. I opened Mark's mail, a betrayal in itself, and I knew it. Scanned a calendar he had left open on the kitchen island, and found a tacked-on appointment the week Ethan had first mobilized. Coffee 6 p.m. with no name. I could have imagined it away. Instead, I called Claire, because small-town ties mean every person's story overlaps with others. And she answered with the kind of candor only a woman going through her own hurt might offer. Claire was ashamed and weary. She'd been blunt about kissing someone at a party, a mistake she regretted, and she admitted the receipts were hers. She also said, in a voice that trembled with embarrassment, that when Ethan had confronted her, she'd told the truth about the kiss but nothing about anything more. The confession should have closed a chapter, but when I asked, almost as a test, whether she'd ever seen Mark around Claire's office or vice versa, she hesitated. Then she said quietly, "There's someone older who sometimes brings me coffee. It's awkward. I didn't think anything of it, until now." The world narrowed to a line between two names, Mark and Claire's mystery man. I felt my son's pain fold into my own. It wasn't only the betrayal of vows. It was the strange geometry of a life where father and son could be wounded by the same partner. The thought was a fever dream, and then impossibly it made sense. The timing, the receipts, the man's age. The evidence stacked like a house of cards. When I finally confronted Mark, I did it with the kind of exhausted calm that leaves no room for theatrics. I placed the crumpled napkin and Ethan's shaky recounting of events on the table between us. He sat, head bowed, and for a long moment said nothing. Then he told a version of the truth that was both smaller and larger than I expected. He admitted to a series of lunches with a young woman at the company where he occasionally did consulting work. He called them stupid, flirtatious moments, said they never meant anything, that he'd never intended to hurt anyone. I could see the way his voice tried to resettle the world into manageable pieces. But confessions don't always fix the harm they confess. Ethan came home later that night to an atmosphere that felt altered, the calm replaced by a brittle politeness. He looked at me with a new expression, not childlike, not quite adult. Someone who had discovered the strange fact that people you love can disappoint you in ways you never learned to defend against. We sat together on the back steps, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like drier sheets and grief, and held the ache like an honest thing between us. The aftermath was not a neat courtroom scene or a cinematic showdown. Mark and I had long, honest conversations about what we needed, about boundaries, about rebuilding trust if it was even possible. Ethan took time away from Claire to breathe, to remember himself outside the gravity of a relationship. Claire apologized more than once, asking for mercy and giving nothing in return but honesty. The family adjusted, imperfectly, painfully, like a boat mended with both staples and care. What surprised me most was the tenderness that seeped in afterward. There was no sudden shuffle into happy endings. Instead, we learned to notice each other with more care. Ethan started dating again months later, tentatively, with a new patience. Mark and I began couples counseling, not because we expected miracles, but because we wanted tools to speak across the small betrayals that sometimes rot a marriage. We learned that forgiveness is a practice, not a moment, and sometimes the bravest thing is to sit with discomfort and choose day after day to show up. If there's a lesson here, it isn't moralizing or dramatic. It's that infidelity doesn't always arrive as a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a slow leak that reveals the weak spots in our armor. It forces uncomfortable truths into the open, about desire, about loneliness, about the ways we seek connection in other people when we forget to ask of those closest to us. It also taught me that when your child knocks on your door in a panic, the best you can offer is presence, truth, and a bridge back to themselves. So when people ask what happened next, I tell them honestly, we learned to speak more clearly, to be less lonely in our marriage, and to let Ethan find his own path, with the awkward, beautiful knowledge that families survive not because they are perfect, but because they keep choosing each other in spite of the mistakes. If you're watching this because you've been hurt, know this. There is no single right answer. There is only the messy work of being human and the slow, stubborn art of healing. If you like this story, please like and subscribe. And remember, you're not alone.